We're counting down the 25 forgotten American jobs that once gave workers something almost unimaginable today. Free meals, a roof over their heads, and a doctor who never sent a bill. These were the jobs that fed you, housed you, and patched you up when the work broke your body, from lonely mountain lookouts to the bunkhouses of the open range, from company towns carved out of coal country to camps that pulled a generation out of the Great Depression. Some of these deals were generous, some were a gilded cage, but every one of them tells the story of a time when a paycheck was only half of what a job was worth. Which vanished trade sits at number 1? Let's begin the countdown with number 25. Number 25. The fire lookout lived closer to the clouds than to any neighbor. From the 1910s onward, the U.S. Forest Service planted young men and women in glass-walled towers on the highest ridges of the West, where their only job was to watch the horizon for the first thread of smoke. The agency hauled their groceries up by mule train, gave them a bunk in the tower cab or a cabin below, and covered the doctor when a fall or a lightning strike put them in harm's way. A season paid little, but a lookout spent nothing. No rent, no grocer, no landlord. They cooked on a wood stove, read by lantern, and learned to name every peak in silence. When aircraft and satellites took over the watch, the towers went dark. Today, only a few hundred still stand staffed, romantic relics of a job that traded a salary for a kingdom of sky. Number 24. The lighthouse keeper held one of the loneliest and most essential jobs in America. From colonial times until the lights were automated, the keeper and his family lived in a cottage attached to the tower, provisioned by the lighthouse service with flour, salt pork, coal, and oil delivered by tender boat. The government paid a modest wage, but the house was free, the fuel was free, and a service physician tended the family when sickness reached the rock. In exchange, the keeper climbed the spiral stairs every night, trimmed the wick, and kept the lamp burning through fog and gale so ships would not founder on the shoals. Children grew up learning the rhythm of the light. When the Coast Guard automated the last stations in the 20th century, the keepers were retired for good. Their empty cottages now draw tourists to the very coasts they once guarded. Number 23. The live-in domestic servant was, for a century, the largest class of working women in America. A cook, a maid, or a hired girl moved into an attic room of the household that employed her and, in return for long days of scrubbing and serving, received her meals at the kitchen table, a bed under the eaves, and a family that, at its best, nursed her through fevers. In 1900, a servant might earn only a few dollars a week, but room and board were reckoned as half her pay. She rose before dawn to light the stove and finished long after the family slept. Oral histories recall both kindness and cruelty behind those kitchen doors. As household appliances and rising wages emptied the servants' quarters after the First World War, the live-in maid slowly vanished, and with her, a whole hidden economy of bed and board. Number 22. The live-in nanny and the governess occupied a strange rung on the household ladder, too educated to eat with the servants, too poor to sit with the family. She was given a room near the nursery, a place at the table, and the run of a fine house she could never afford, along with whatever doctoring the children received. For a young woman with schooling but no fortune, it was a rare, respectable roof. She taught French and piano, walked the children in the park, and mended their manners as well as their clothes. Diaries from the era record the ache of belonging nowhere, of raising children who would grow up to command her. As public schooling spread and the great households shrank, the governess faded into memory. The modern au pair carries a faint echo of the bargain. Labor traded for a bedroom and a seat at someone else's table. Number 21. Before the modern shift schedule, the firefighter practically lived at the firehouse, and the firehouse lived to feed him. Companies slept in dormitories above the engine bay, slid down the brass pole at the alarm, and cooked communal meals in a kitchen that became the heart of the house. The city gave them their bunk, and the men pooled their money for the groceries that turned a station into a home. When a beam fell or the smoke took a man's lungs, the department's surgeon and the fireman's benevolent funds carried him and often his widow. The whole rhythm of the job, days and nights on end together, forged the brotherhood that still defines the trade. Even now, though most firefighters go home between shifts, the firehouse kitchen table endures, the last surviving piece of an era when the job came with a bed, a meal, and a family in turnout gear. Number 20. For generations, becoming a nurse meant moving into the hospital itself. Training schools housed their students and staff nurses in a nurse's home beside the wards, where matrons enforced curfews as strict as any convent. In exchange for grueling 12-hour shifts, a young nurse received her room, her meals in the hospital dining hall, her starched uniforms, and free care in the very beds she made. The pay was famously thin, but the arrangement let farm girls and immigrants' daughters build a profession without a penny to their name. Oral histories recall the camaraderie of the dormitory, the exhaustion and the pride of the graduation cap. As nursing became a college degree and hospitals cut costs in the post-war years, the nurses' homes were converted to offices and closed. The bargain of bed, board, and vocation under one roof quietly disappeared from American medicine. Number 19. On the American frontier, the school teacher often had no home of her own, because the community was her home. Under a custom called boarding round, the teacher rotated from family to family, spending a week or two at each farmhouse in the district, sleeping in a spare bed and eating at the family table as part of her wages. Later, districts built a small teacherage beside the schoolhouse so she would have a place to stay. She earned perhaps $25 a month, but her keep cost her nothing, and neighbors looked after her when she fell ill. In return, she taught 8 grades in one room, hauled the coal, and swept the floor. The arrangement bound her tightly to the town's watchful eyes. As consolidated schools and automobiles let teachers live where they pleased, boarding round vanished, and with it a peculiar intimacy between a teacher and the families she served. Number 18. In the golden age of the Grand Hotel and the mountain resort, the staff lived where they worked, tucked into cramped quarters on the top floor or behind the kitchens. Bellhops, maids, waiters, and porters received a bunk, 3 meals from the same kitchens that fed the guests, and the house physician when the season's fatigue caught up with them. At remote resorts in the mountains and by the sea, staffing an entire town of workers meant feeding and housing them all. Wages were low and hours were long, but a young worker could save nearly every dollar, since the hotel supplied the rest. Oral histories recall the below-stairs world of romance, gossip, and exhaustion that ran beneath the guests' leisure. As motels, cars, and cheap suburbs made commuting easy, the live-in staff moved out. The servants' floors became storage, and the hotel that once housed its own quietly emptied. Number 17. Each summer, the Alaska salmon canneries pulled thousands of workers to the edge of the continent, and the industry had no choice but to house and feed them all. Companies shipped crews north by steamer, lodged them in bunkhouses along the shore, and ran mess halls that served enormous meals to fuel the punishing pace of the pack. There was nowhere else to eat, nowhere else to sleep, and a cannery first aid station tended the cuts and crushed fingers the machinery handed out. Filipino, Chinese, and native crews worked shoulder to shoulder on the gutting lines from dawn until the fish stopped running. The pay came in a lump at season's end, since a worker spent nothing all summer. As freezer ships and automation shrank the crews, the great cannery camps emptied. The bunkhouses rotted on their pilings, monuments to a job at the world's edge that asked everything and supplied everything. Number 16. The merchant sailor lived by the oldest room and board bargain of all. The moment he signed the ship's articles, the vessel became his home. A bunk in the forecastle, 3 meals a day from the ship's galley, and the medicine chest and captain's surgeon when fever or a fall struck at sea. For months at a stretch, he owned nothing but his sea chest, yet wanted for nothing the ship could provide. He climbed frozen rigging, chipped rust, and stood the night watch under strange stars, and his pay accumulated untouched until he reached port. Oral histories from sailors' homes recall the hard food, the harder discipline, and the freedom of a life with no rent on land. As container ships slashed crews to a handful and shore leave shrank to hours, the old sailor's world dissolved. The sea still feeds and houses its crews, but the teeming forecastle is gone. Number 15. The whaler took the sailor's bargain to its most extreme. A New England whaling voyage could last 3 or 4 years, and for all that time the ship was the crew's entire world. A hammock below decks, salt beef and hardtack from the stores, and the ship's officers to set a broken bone far from any port. A green hand signed on not for wages, but for a lay, a fractional share of whatever oil the voyage rendered, and in the meantime the ship fed and housed him around the globe. He rowed open boats at creatures many times his weight and boiled blubber in the trypots until the decks ran slick. Many came home with almost nothing after their debts to the ship's store were settled. When petroleum replaced whale oil in the lamps of America, the whale ships rotted at the wharves, ending one of the harshest all-found jobs the country ever knew. Number 14. On the great cattle drives, one man fed the whole outfit from a wagon, and that made the chuck wagon cook the most important figure on the trail after the trail boss. The cook, often called Cookie, drove ahead, set up camp, and turned out beans, biscuits, sourdough, and stew from a wooden chuck box mounted on the tailgate, feeding a dozen hungry cowboys 3 times a day across 1,000 miles of grass. His wagon carried the bedrolls, the medicines, and whatever passed for a doctor on the open range. A cowboy who broke a leg was set and hauled by Cookie. He rose at 3 in the morning and was the last to sleep. On a drive, there was no store, no inn, no clinic, only the wagon and the fire. When railroads and barbed wire ended the long drives, the chuck wagon rolled into legend, the mobile kitchen that housed and healed an entire crew. Number 13. The working cowboy earned less than almost anyone imagined, but the ranch supplied nearly everything he needed to live. A hired hand slept in the bunkhouse, ate at the ranch table or from the cook's wagon, kept his horses in the ranch string, and was patched up by whatever remedies the outfit kept on hand when a bronc threw him. $30 a month sounded meager until you realized he paid for no roof, no food, and no mount. He rode fence, branded calves, and pulled cattle from bogs in weather that would kill a lesser man. Oral histories from the range recall the bunkhouse nights of cards, tall tales, and mended tack. The cowboy owned little more than his saddle, boots, and hat, the tools he carried from job to job. As ranching mechanized and the open range fenced over, the bunkhouse thinned, though on the biggest spreads, the old bargain of bed and board still rides on. Number 12. The sheepherder lived a solitude that few jobs could match. Sent alone into the high country for months with 1,000 head, a dog, and a horse, he was given a canvas-topped sheep wagon that served as his house on wheels, a bed, a stove, and a cupboard, and the ranch packed in his flour, coffee, and bacon by the load. The outfit paid him at season's end and looked after him when the isolation or an accident laid him low. Many were Basque immigrants who spoke little English and saved nearly every dollar toward a flock of their own. He moved camp with the grass, watched for coyotes and storms, and might not see another human face for weeks. As synthetic fabrics and cheap imports gutted the wool market, the herds shrank and the wagons emptied. The lonely trade that housed a man in a wagon and fed him from a ranch account all but disappeared from the mountains. Number 11. When oil came in, whole towns appeared overnight, and the companies had to house and feed the men who drilled them. In the boom towns of Texas, Oklahoma, and California, operators threw up bunkhouses and cook shacks beside the derricks, ran mess halls that served meat and potatoes at all hours, and kept a company doctor or a first aid shack for the constant maimings of the rig floor. A roughneck worked in mud and danger, and in return the outfit fed him, bunked him, and stitched him. In the most organized camps, the company ran everything from the beds to the bathhouse. Oral histories recall the mud, the gushers, the sudden fortunes and sudden funerals. When a field played out, the town moved on and the camp was left to the wind. As permanent housing and modern safety rules took over, the all-found oil camp faded, leaving ghost towns scattered across the oil patch. Number 10. The traveling circus was a town on rails, and it fed and housed every soul who made it move. Roustabouts, riggers, and performers lived aboard the train in sleeping cars, ate in an enormous canvas cookhouse that could serve 1,000 people at 2 seatings a meal, and were tended by the show's own doctor as it rolled from town to town. The famous flag over the cookhouse, orange on one side, blue on the other, signaled whether it was mealtime. A worker who jumped the train at one whistle stop had a bed, 3 squares, and a family of misfits by the next. He raised the big top at dawn and struck it at midnight. Oral histories recall the brutal labor and the fierce loyalty of the lot. As television emptied the seats and trucks replaced the trains, the great railroad circuses folded, and the rolling cookhouse that fed a marching city was folded away with them. Number 9. The railroads could not run without the section gangs who kept the track alive, and to keep those men where the work was, the companies housed them along the line. Section hands and their families lived in trackside section houses or in old boxcars fitted out as homes, strung across empty country far from any town. The railroad supplied the housing, often the fuel, and a company hospital system, some of the first in America, that treated the injured for a small monthly deduction. Many were immigrants and later Mexican track crews who raised children beside the rails. They tamped ballast and replaced ties by hand in blistering heat, keeping the iron road smooth for the trains that thundered past. As machines replaced the hand crews and the branch lines closed, the section houses were torn down. The families who once lived where the tracks met the horizon scattered, and their trackside villages vanished. Number 8. The Pullman porter belonged to one of the most storied jobs in American history. Serving aboard the luxury sleeping cars, The porter effectively lived on the train for days at a stretch, snatching sleep in the smoking room or a berth, eating on the move, and covered for a time by the company's arrangements as he crossed the continent. The Pullman Company hired thousands of black men for these positions, and though the wages were low and the tips essential, the job carried a bunk, board on the rails, and a dignity that helped build a black middle class and a movement. Porters made beds, shined shoes, and soothed passengers around the clock, too often called by the single name George. Their union, led by A. Philip Randolph, helped ignite the fight for civil rights. As air travel emptied the sleeping cars, the porter's world faded, but its legacy rode on far beyond the tracks. Number 7. Deep in the North Woods, the logging camp was a self-contained world that ran on food. Lumberjacks slept in long bunkhouses, dozens to a room, and ate in a cookhouse where the meals were legendary. Mountains of pancakes, beef, beans, and pie served in near silence so the crews would eat fast and get back to the timber. The company supplied the bunk, the food, and a camp doctor for the crushing injuries the woods dealt out. A logger's pay piled up over a winter in the woods, since the camp furnished everything but his boots and his axe. Oral histories recall the roar of the cookhouse, the reek of wet wool, and the danger of the log drive down the river. As chainsaws, trucks, and day crews replaced the isolated camps, the bunkhouses and cookhouses fell silent. The all-found logging camp, where a man was fed like a king and worked like a mule, passed into folklore. Number 6. In the 1830s and 40s, the mills of Lowell, Massachusetts, pioneered an experiment in American industry. They recruited young farm women and housed them in a company boarding houses beside the looms. A mill girl shared a room, ate her meals in the boarding house dining room, and lived under the watchful eye of a matron who enforced curfews and church attendance. The corporations supplied the roof and the board and deducted their cost from her pay, while a company physician looked after the boarders. For a farmer's daughter, it was a rare chance to earn her own money and read her own books. They worked 13-hour days amid deafening machinery, yet published their own literary magazine at night. As waves of immigrant labor and falling wages ended the experiment, the boarding house system collapsed. The Lowell mill girl, housed and fed by the company that worked her, became the first chapter of America's industrial story. Number 5. In the depths of the Great Depression, one government program housed, fed, and healed a whole generation of young men. The Civilian Conservation Corps, launched in 1933, enrolled millions of jobless youths, moved them into military-style camps, and put them to work planting forests, cutting trails, and building the parks Americans still enjoy. Every enrollee received a bunk, 3 full meals a day, uniforms, and medical and dental care, for many, the first real doctor they had ever seen. He earned $30 a month, and 25 of it was sent straight home to his family. Boys who arrived hungry and thin left the camps healthy, literate, and disciplined, having gained weight and learned a trade. Oral histories recall it as the making of a generation. When the Second World War pulled the young men into uniform, the CCC was disbanded, but the forests it planted and the lives it rebuilt outlasted it by decades. Number 4. Building Hoover Dam in the 1930s meant building an entire town to house the men who poured it. In the blistering Nevada desert, the government and the contractors raised Boulder City from bare rock, dormitories and cottages, a mess hall that fed thousands, and a hospital to treat the injuries and heat that the canyon inflicted. A single man's dormitory bed and board came cheap out of his wages, and the company hospital tended the falls, the blasting accidents, and the deadly summer heat. Men desperate for depression work flocked to the site, grateful for a paycheck, a bed, and a cafeteria in a place where nothing had stood before. Oral histories recall the heat above 120 degrees, the danger and the pride of taming the Colorado. When the dam was finished, Boulder City remained one of the few company towns to outlive its purpose and become a real home. Number 3. The steel that built modern America was made by men the companies often housed themselves. In mill towns from Pennsylvania to Indiana, the great firms threw up rows of company houses beside the furnaces, ran company stores that sold on credit, and staffed company doctors and hospitals to mend the burns and mangled limbs the mills handed out. A steel worker could rent a company house, buy at the company store, and be treated by the company surgeon, his entire life orbiting the plant that employed him. The work was murderous heat and 12-hour turns beside molten iron, but it fed and sheltered immigrant families by the tens of thousands. Oral histories recall the glow on the night sky and the whistle that ruled every home. As unions won real wages and the industry collapsed in the late 20th century, the company houses were sold off and the mills torn down, ending the world the furnaces built. Number 2. On the sugar plantations of Hawaii, the companies imported workers from across the Pacific and built entire camps to house them. From the late 1800s, plantations recruited laborers from Japan, China, the Philippines, Portugal, and beyond, lodged them in plantation camps, often divided by nationality, and supplied housing, frequently a ration of rice and provisions, and a plantation hospital with a doctor on staff. A worker in the cane fields received a shack, a ration, and medical care as part of the contract that bound him to the plantation. The labor was brutal, cutting and hauling cane under a tropical sun for pennies a day. But the camps fed, housed, and healed a population that would become the heart of modern Hawaii. Oral histories recall the plantation whistle, the mixing of languages into pidgin, and the slow fight for fair pay. As the sugar industry died in the 20th century, the camps emptied, leaving only the diverse islands they had built. And finally, in first place, no job fed, housed, and healed its workers as completely or controlled them as completely as coal mining in the company town. Across Appalachia and the West, coal operators built entire towns from the ground up. Company houses, a company store, a company doctor, even a company church and school. A miner rented his house from the company, bought his food and tools at the company store on credit, and was treated by the company physician, all of it deducted from his pay, often in company scrip that could be spent nowhere else. In the best towns, it was cradle-to-grave security. In the worst, it was a debt no man could climb out of, captured forever in the famous song about a miner who owed everything to the company store. He crawled into the dark each morning, knowing the mountain might not let him out. Oral histories recall the coal dust, the Union Wars, and the fierce pride of the coal camps. As mines mechanized and closed, the company towns were abandoned or sold off to their residents, ending the most total bargain in American labor, a job that gave a man everything and sometimes took everything in return. From the lonely fire lookout to the all-encompassing coal town, these 25 vanished jobs share one truth. There was a time when a job wasn't just a paycheck, but a whole way of life, a bed, a table, and a doctor, for better and for worse. Some were acts of real care. Others were golden cages. All of them faded as wages rose and workers won the freedom to live on their own terms. If your family carries a story from one of these lost trades, Share it in the comments. These jobs are gone, but the people who lived them shouldn't be.